That should help with your workload though, Steve, if there's 4 of you.
Boy, wouldn't that be nice? But that's just 4 people to screw up what I can handle with one. So as late as we were here last night, Ms. Nyan, I'm surprised I'm not seeing double or 4. Gee. I had to finally kick Garitano out of the building.
Was there a meeting last night?
It was a Ward 3 meeting.
And you notice Joe is in Ward 8, but he was there.
Yeah.
Because apparently he just loves meetings that much.
Apparently.
That's where him and I differ.
He differs from just about everybody. You know, I guess we started at 7, it was over at 8:20, and he did come and sat through the whole meeting, and then wanted to hang around and talk. And we're going, he grabbed Mundell and he's talking, and I told Captain, I said, Captain, walk away from him, just walk away. And I said, I'm turning out the lights, locking the doors, everybody go home, it's late. But I don't know if he hauled in his water bed, I don't know what, but man, he didn't want to go. Hey, there. So he's joined us here. He hears us talking about him.
He hears you guys talking. So sure. Yeah,
I knew he was there because he told me that he was going to do it. So I'm doing this for his benefit.
All right. Well, to avoid any throwbacks at you, Steve, we'll go ahead and get started here. So welcome everyone to the October 19th, excuse me, Planning and Parks Committee meeting. We will start off with roll call. Mr. Cruz, if you could take care of that for us, please.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Nyan.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
And Chair Bartoni.
Here. So thank you very much. Before we get to the approval of minutes, I just wanted to kind of recap something that was said last week after our meeting. We got an email from one of the participants asking about the virtual chats, because there was like a comment made, like one of the participants was chatting with us, but the rest of the participants couldn't see those chats. So just as full disclosure, Mr. Cross is working with the city attorney, whether everybody can view those, we can view those after the fact, or just shut them off. So Steve, I don't know if you have an update on that or not, but I just wanted to let everybody know that was brought up and that we are looking into it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have an update, but there are a couple of considerations that Mr. Young and I are looking at in terms of, public participation, and that is a finite period of time. And so what we didn't know at the time of the last meeting is what our capabilities were to control that chat box. Because initially we weren't even able to save chats after the meeting ended. Well, we have since learned that we can capture that. But John Young is looking into how we would control so that when public participation ends, and people can't use the chat box to continue that. Also, about how you control these conversations that are going on kind of as a sidebar, that, there's a lot of issues that we're looking into, and we'll present it to council because it affects all committee meetings, but something that's still kind of being looked at in terms of what's the right thing to do. So Chair Bartoni, that's about all I can say at this point anyway.
Okay, good enough. Move to approval of minutes. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting made by Councilmember Farmer. We have a second. Seconded by Councilmember Galani. Is there any discussion? Anybody have any comments on that? Teresa, go ahead.
I have two comments. On page 2, under the action items, planning matters, part 1, there's a statement that says, the 4th line down, in that at which time each of the 6 aerator motors were photographed and verified new, all motors were operating and tested. I would strike the tested because they were not all operating and tested. That was one point. The second point was on page 3. In the first paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11 sentences down, it says the fact that aquaculture operation will operate below established sound requirements, even with new quieter standards. I would say the opinion that aquaculture operation will operate. It's not a fact. We don't know that until it happens. Those are the only two.
Joe, do you want to respond to either of those since you were there with Travis?
Mr. Chair, I believe the requested modifications are appropriate and probably better reflect the conversation than what the minutes that Gary and I prepared do. So the department has no objection.
Okay, so if everybody's okay with that, we'll just make those changes after this meeting, if everybody's okay, like we've done in the past. Is there any objections to that? Okay, and then seeing none, was there any other comments on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of the minutes with the discussed changes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. Next on our agenda is public input. We do have a couple attendees. One, Ms. Kaiser, which I probably think she's here for the budget, but if any, Travis, do we have any hands up for public participation?
You do not currently, but if we just give a few seconds, if Mr. Garitano would like to raise his hand. And Mr. Garitano put in the chat, he has no comments, so.
Okay. All right, well enough. So that takes us to our action items. We have 3 planning matters. We have 4 park matters, both including budget items. And then we have an executive session as well today. So first on our planning matters is the presentation of the department's operating budget for its planning functions, 2022. Joe, I'm assuming you're taking this, or Steve taking this, or Steve is taking this. Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask, if I may, if the committee would be willing. The agenda has the parks budget up first. Well, actually, I guess it's the planning department. And then there are 2 agenda items, and then there's the parks. As you all saw on the attachment, it's all kind of together. So I'm wondering if perhaps if the committee would agree to it, that we could just cover the budget in its entirety with the starting with the Parks Department, and then working through the Planning Department, and then working through the 5-year capital plan and so forth. If we could just do that and then get that out of the way and then move into the other agenda items, if you all were okay with that.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Is anybody opposed to that? Okay, well enough. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I am going to start with the Parks Department. That's Department 40, and that comes first in the attachment to your agenda. And many of you on this call here have sat through the other budget presentations that we made for every other department. This is, in fact, is the last budget presentation before Monday night's council meeting. So the first item, I'm looking at the expenditure detail for the Parks Department. And I'm not going to go through every line item. Again, you all have been through this with us over the last week or so, but I am going to highlight a few items just to draw your attention to it. And then I am going to, in some cases, ask Mr. Vunich to provide a little bit more detail that I think is appropriate for you all to hear about. But starting with the Parks Department, and I'm going to be looking at the column labeled budget 2022, and I'm going to be comparing that to the estimated 2021 budget. So in terms of personnel expenditures, really not a whole lot of changes. The regular salaries are slightly down. Now, you all have heard me, or most of you have heard me say that we did build in a cost of living adjustment, merit increase / cost of living adjustment for the 2022 budget. But the fact that the salary is down versus 2021 is by virtue of the fact that Bree Kelchin was at a relatively high salary because she's been here and she had bounced around in other departments. My department was started there and then came over here and then went back over to Joe's department, and her salary had reflected those changes in those positions. The replacement for the recreation specialist will not be at quite that high a salary. So you'll see a little downturn there in the salary. The one item that will jump out to you a little bit is the employee health benefits are significantly higher as projected for 2022. And the reason for that is we follow a consistent policy when we hire somebody. It's within the salary range, but we assume a certain level. It's a male at 40 years of age with 2 children. We plug that in anytime there's open position, and therefore the employee health benefits, again, it's stratified, and so that's that number. It's going to err on the high side more times than not, but that's good. We want to have a conservative budget, but that's why that number is so high, simply because of the type of what we use to slot in for that. When you look at the operating expenditures and you go down the line comparing 2022 versus 2021, there are really very little changes. Some of the bigger line items, for instance, supplies for recreation, that's gone up a little bit, but there's going to be more items or more events in 2022 than there were in 2021 because we were still dealing, with COVID. So there's a slight increase there. Utilities, water, in 2021, it's projected to end up the year at 10,000, and the projection is 15,000 for 2022. That reflects again what occurred during COVID. Restrooms in the parks were closed. Water fountains were shut down. Water was not being used. And first of all, the cost of water has gone up, number one, but number two, we're projecting a higher usage. We're expecting all of those, all the restroom facilities are open in their parks. And so therefore they're going to be used a little bit more. If we continue on, under contractual expenditures, you'll notice that the consultant costs, estimated at $12,500 in 2021. The 2022 budget reflects a $25,000 expenditure. In conversations with Mr. Vunich, there's a lot of detail behind that, but invariably, we plan for potentially having to hire a consultant for something that comes along. The pickleball courts is a prime example. That was not something that we had anticipated, but it is the desire of this committee, certainly, and hopefully the council as well, to look into it. Well, as you know, the city needed to hire a consultant to determine where the best place to put it and how to put it, at Community Park, et cetera. So Joe builds in 2 or 3 different events, if you will, for those kinds of consultants. So it's not any one consultant, it's not any one project, but it's just kind of the way that it is. The other items, as you go down, Celebrate Wildwood, there's a little bit of an increase there in expense. One of the things that Mr. Vunich is working on for me, and I'm sure he will present it to this committee as well, is the net result of Celebrate Wildwood. We all want to know what kind of revenue we generated through donations, through partnerships that we formed, and folks paid money for. That might be anywhere from $13,000 to $15,000, as well as tent rentals by the various vendors. versus our expenditures. So there's $93,000 for 2021. It'll be interesting to see what that final number falls out to be. But if 2022 Celebrate Wildwood is expected to be a little bit bigger, a little bit better, we've built in a little bit higher costs. Not much else going on in special projects as far as that department is concerned. I would move into Department of Planning, but before I do, I will just open it up to see if anybody has any questions with regards to the Parks Department and anything that we've covered so far. Either Joe or myself can answer. Dawn is kind of in the background, and Dawn is there because she has access to the general ledger. So if you really got into some specific question, I've asked Dawn to kind of be there in case we needed to go quite that detailed. But if there aren't any questions, I'll move on. But anybody have any questions?
Steve, I have a couple. Oh, Deborah, go ahead first. Go ahead, Deborah.
So I wrote my questions all down, and so I may have to jump around here. If it's not the right portion, just tell me, wait till later. So I know in the previous discussion, Steve, the idea of adding additional staff has come up, and the need for that. Is there, I don't see anything in the budget as far as like moving ahead with that. Can you comment on that?
Well, I can comment, and then Joe can certainly jump in and add to it. But we are filling 2 positions. Travis moved to the senior planner position, and then we backfilled with hiring Robin. So we filled that position that was open for a while. We do need to fill the recreation specialist, Bree, who left the department and has gone to work in the court system part-time. And then we have the assistant director of planning and parks, Melanie Ripico, and I've mentioned her in my city administrator report, will be starting a week from yesterday. So this coming Monday on the 25th, she will be starting. So basically we've added, so Joe is back to full staff by adding these 2 positions. And I think, and Mr. Vunich can certainly speak up, but I think at that point, I think we should be in good shape, I think. Joe, would you concur?
Mr. Cross, thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for the most part, we've been short-staffed for the past 18 months. So I think getting back to full staff will be a good test to see if we are as efficient and productive as we once were. And if so, then like Steve mentioned, I think we'll be in pretty good shape. Thank you.
And then my next question is just for clarification. I think in the past, we've always had salaries divided up between planning and parks, and that's the reason for it appearing in 2 different sections of the budget. Is that correct?
So we just covered the Parks Department, and then we'll be moving in and talking about the Planning Department. That's a separate department, and we'll be talking about personnel expenses in that department in a few minutes here.
So do they overlap?
They do not overlap. They are separate departments.
Okay. Let's see. My other question was in this, it appears elsewhere in the budget, but under the expenditure details under special projects, like Tough Mudder and Art Festival and Barbecue Bash, they're listed, but there's no revenue or there's no cost associated with those. I'm sure that's a budget process that I don't quite understand. Can you kind of address that?
I can, and then and Joe probably can supply more information. The Tough Mudder, I think we tried to do that one time, maybe in conjunction with the ski folks. Why am I drawing a blank on their name? Hidden Valley. I think when Julian was here, he tried to pull that together, and that didn't work. That line item probably could go away. I don't know if that's going to be happening in the near future. The Art Festival is now combined with that's combined, I guess, Joe, with Celebrate Wildwood now. And so it's not a standalone event in the city, at least it wasn't in 2021. And I think Joe is expecting the same format. I think it worked pretty well. And I think that the expectation is that those two events would be combined in 2022. Mr. Vunish, is that not correct?
Yes, we're thinking that the art festival and Celebrate Wildwood will be a single event, potentially 2 days versus one. And that's the reason for the slight increase in the amount in the budget.
So should those items be removed from the budget, or are they retained because at one point there was an expenditure allocated for them?
I think we could remove the line item Tough Mudder because there's no expenditures even going back to 2019. So that line item could be moved. The art festival does have something from 2019. When we do the budget for 2023, that year 2019 would drop off, and at that point we could probably eliminate that line as well.
Okay. I think that's all my questions that are related to what you've already gone over.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions?
Anybody got anything else? So Steve, I got a couple quick ones. The community garden is very popular, but the budget's going down $8,000 on that. Can you just explain that, please?
I think in looking at that, the other aspect of putting together this budget, and I think you all may have heard the mayor say he wants to be able to present a balanced budget to the council. When Ms. Kaiser and I put the original budget together as it was presented in terms of us determining the revenues and then looking at the expenditures that were submitted by the department heads and so forth, there was $1 million gap. We were in the hole $1 million between projected revenues versus projected expenses. So the mayor and Ms. Kaiser and I sat down and spent the better part of a day going through the budget line by line by line in terms of where we might be able to have some savings to try to make up that difference. And this was one of the items that it was believed that we might be a little more efficient and might be able to do things a little bit differently and be able to provide the same level of service, the same kind of the garden and so forth, but at perhaps a reduced cost.
Fair enough. And then the next item, and it just happens to be next on your list also, gets a lot of discussion every year, and I'm not speaking for or against it, but increase in the Pond Athletic Association donation as well.
Actually, I had a discussion with Mr. Vunish about that line item and a couple things. That appears to have been an error. Not sure where that came from, but we are capped. We are capped at $5,000. So, and that'll come before council even before we spend the $5,000. But the $7,500 is not a correct number. We would adjust that at mid-year and bring it either down to 5,000, or if council decided that they didn't want to make that contribution this year, then we would take it down to 0.
Okay.
But the contribution to the Athletic Association is not anticipated to be $7,500.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, go ahead with the rest of your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Well, then we'll go to the same schedule for the planning department, which is the expenditure detail. Again, same 2 columns. The regular salaries, you'll see a significant increase, and that is primarily, well, it's due to the 2 positions that are now filled, the planner position and certainly the assistant director. The assistant director is a fairly high salary, as you might imagine, for that level of a position. So that as well as the adjustment that we were able to make to the staff in terms of merit increase / cost of living adjustment creates that differential. If you go then down into the operating expenditures, not a lot of significant increase versus 2021. I will draw your attention, however, to the line entitled Abatements. And that is projected at $10,000 in 2021, but is projected to be $30,000 in 2022. In conversations with Mr. Vunic, There's a couple properties, and I'll ask Joe to step in here, and he can talk a little more in depth about that. But there's two properties in particular that will require some substantial expenditure to either take them down or to board them up or do whatever is necessary to provide safety to the public. Mr. Vunich, would you like to expand on that answer, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the abatement fund has always been used by the city of Wildwood to kind of address problem properties on a one-on-one basis. And as Mr. Cross mentioned, we have a skilled care nursing facility that's been abandoned for a number of years on Ridge Road. And for the most part, we try to keep that building secure. So some of the funds go there. We also have an in-ground pool that's been abandoned at a house in Ward 5, I believe. And we're trying to address that because the neighbors have identified it as a nuisance, and it certainly is. It's an elderly couple. They don't have the wherewithal. So again, we're thinking this year, 2022, I should say, next year, we're hoping to be able to help there. We also use that fund for helping the Open Space Council with Operation Clean Stream. And then finally, we use it too if there's a particular property that has some issues and we can offer a dumpster to assist. We use that fund for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I appreciate the help. As we go down the line, again, there's not many significant differences in the other line items. Picking up an extra computer or two for those that have aged out and we need to replace them. We try to replace laptops every 3 years, and so there are some that are coming due that we want to upgrade. Not much else, quite honestly, in the expenditures. So if you keep scrolling down, we'll get into the capital improvement sales tax. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about that for the budget 2022. This is a standalone fund. It's funded by the half-cent capital improvement sales tax. So we are projecting to start the year with $6.8 million in this particular fund. This fund, through that half-cent capital improvement sales tax, generates about $2.3 million a year. We also are projecting to receive a little over $800,000 in grants. The largest component of that is $525,000 grant that we are anticipating receiving for the Bluffview Park, which we're going to talk about when we get a little bit more into the capital. But that makes up that majority of that $800,000. So, but we also have some expenditures, and we'll get into the detail. But we're projecting to spend $4.5 million combination. And this particular fund is for funding not only the projects that are in the Public Works Department, but also in the Planning and Parks Department as well. And so when you look at the $4.5 million, half of that, almost half of that, $2.2 million is in roadway improvements. So, and those of you that sit on the admin PW committee, we discussed that when we discussed the Public Works budget. So we end up the year, we're projecting to end up the year, this fund balance still at $5.3 million. But when you get into the details, if you scroll down a couple slides, then you'll get into the planned project expenditures for fiscal year 2022. The first section has to do with park and trail development, and you've seen a lot of this stuff in what we discussed at council and so forth. But I will draw your attention to a couple very large items. One of which is the Bluffview Park improvement. So this is showing an expenditure in 2022 of $725,000. But keep in mind, I just mentioned that we are anticipating a grant of $525,000. So the net cost to the city is $200,000 to do the things that you all saw in terms of those renderings that were provided by the city's consultant in the accessibility, the covered, the benches and so forth, and the entrance and so forth. And that's what's contemplated there. The Village Green, it's anticipated that will break ground in 2022. So there's a $200,000 expenditure there. that's contemplated in 2022. The hard court, pickleball court, hard court, whatever you want to call it, that's another $100,000, you know, to build what we talked about at the last P&P meeting in terms of building that. So those are the big items that fall within the parks. The rest of the schedule has to do with roadway improvements and bridge, which is all public works. When you get down into other capital investment, the largest item there has to do with watershed, and that's the $250,000 that is earmarked for watershed and erosion improvement. And for those of you all that sit on the WETF committee, you'll know that they are looking at 2 or 3 projects that would fall within that amount of money that potentially we could kick off here in 2022. That's it under as far as that would relate to any parks or planning items. If you go and you scroll down a few schedules, you'll get to the 5-year plan, the capital improvement plan. And that's going to be the last schedule that I'll talk about until you all have some questions. But that shows 2022 through 2026 in terms of the revenues, and then in terms of where the expenditures are. So, for instance, the Bluffview Park, you know, there's $725,000 before grant, and then there's another $50,000 contemplated in 2025. So not much more expenses, but Village Green is $200,000 in 2022, $700,000 projected in 2023. So that project is going to ramp up here fairly quickly. The one thing I did question Joe about, and we'll just have to see how this shakes out, but the hard court playing area, I pointed out that we were going to spend $100,000 in 2022 to put one in Community Park. But there's also, Mr. Vunich put in another $100,000 in 2023 and another $100,000 in 2026. We'll have to see how that shakes out. I mean, putting those kind of courts in is very popular. The question is, where are we going to put them? So we'll have to see how that plays out. But the rest of these things, or the rest of the items on this schedule, have to do with roadway and bridge construction. And there really isn't, other than when you get down to the very last section on that schedule, other capital investment, where we were contemplating spending $250,000 on watershed erosion in 2022, another $500,000 is projected to be spent in 2023. I'm very hopeful that sometime in 2022, we will know about an infrastructure bill that Congress is still kicking around. And I'd sure like to think that we're going to get some money out of that will help to pay for our watershed and perhaps some other things, so that, you know, $750,000 over the next 2 years will not be coming out of city funds. So that's really all that I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but I wanted to kind of, you know, just hit the high points. I didn't want to go line by line because you guys have a lot of other stuff on the agenda, but certainly myself and Mr. Vunich can answer any questions that you have.
Anybody on the committee have questions? Deborah, go ahead, please.
Some of these are just kind of explanations related to the budget that I'm seeking. In one of the descriptions, it said a venue for the major city events, and just clarify for me, it's my recollection that the original plan for the community park is where major community or major city events was going to be held. So is that what the thought process is? And then also the open space in the Village Green area, is that part of the thought process where we're looking for venues? Or
well, I'm not quite sure where you're looking in there. I guess you're more in the verbiage now as opposed to numbers. So I'll give you my opinion, and then certainly Mr. Vunich, you know, will want to weigh in as well. But yeah, I mean, right now, Community Park is kind of the prime venue. We just had a very nice event there for the appreciation dinner that we had. The mayor really liked that and has indicated he'd like to do that again next year, as opposed to the community room here at City Hall. So that's a very nice venue to do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, yes, Village Green is going to be, I mean, that's the focal point of the city. it'd be neat to be around in 2046, 25 years hence or whatever, and see that time capsule open up and see what it looked like now versus what people are doing then. I don't know if I'll still be around, probably not, but I think that's the main place where things are going to take place, at least in my opinion, which is why, I mean, that's a $12-13 million project, so it better be the focal point of the city. But Joe, your thoughts?
Well, Ms. McCutcheon, when Community Park was purchased in 2009 and went through the master planning process with a group of volunteers, the idea was that Community Park would be the focal point for many of our events. But as you know, more recently, the City Council thought it appropriate to bring those events and keep those events in Town Center and pursued the purchase of the 6 acres directly west of City Hall. And with that purchase, the direction the department received was, let's focus what we can here. There's more parking. There's ample opportunity for, there's all utilities or ample utilities. And then finally, we would help the business community by keeping people in Town Center. Thank you.
So those are the two venues those are the only 2 venues that we're seeking, because the way I read it was that we may be looking for additional venues.
No, as Mr. Cross mentioned, the Village Green under the master planning process is in excess of $12 million. So that's enough of a venue for all of us for a long time to come.
And then I'm still under the verbiage. It indicated that the senior programming was going to be increased, but looking at the numbers, it looks like there's a decrease of funding being allocated. How do those two mesh?
I'll just give you the short answer, which the explanation for the dollar amounts falls in line with the $1 million shortfall and looking for areas to make some cuts. But it's also my understanding that we may not even spend that amount of money, that I think there's a dollar for dollar matching. I think I'm gonna ask Mr. Vunich to expand on that, but that was an area that we thought, you know, given the fact that there may be some funding to support those expenditures.
And Mr. Cross is correct. The community development block grant funds that we receive each year from St. Louis County funds the majority, if not all, of our senior programming. And the reason that the department described an increase in services is, as you know, with COVID-19, we've not been able to return to the Wildwood Family YMCA with many of our activities. And we're hoping in 2022 we will. And we believe we can go back to normal levels, which was easily accommodated by the community development block grant funds.
And I think those block grant funds, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, amount to about $25,000 each year, I believe.
Right. So then I know the budget committee of the chairs for each standing committee is looking at service fees being increased. Are there any details that you can share with us on that? Because that was in the verbiage as well.
Well, I'll start off and then Mr. Vunich can add to it. So the program budget committee met most recently, and a lot of that time was spent kind of covering where we'd been, because we had not met for a while. Mr. Bartoni is new to that committee, so we kind of educated him, if you will, in terms of what had been done and where we're going. The expectation is for that committee to meet again in about 2 weeks from now, because it's been about 2 weeks since we met. We are updating that schedule at least one final time, at least at that level anyway, in terms of generating some additional revenues. I don't think that Mr. Vunich will know better than me if some of that is built into this budget, because some of that stuff would need to ultimately go at least through the committee, if not to council, in terms of raising some of those fees. But I don't know if Mr. Vunich built some of that stuff in. I didn't think so until we actually had final approval. You know, this is pretty much where we are right now.
And with the permission of the chair, Ms. McCutcheon, I just wanted to identify
And then I also saw the increase in the budget for mailing. I know not being able to do mailings notification for the 3,000-foot radius has at some point been an issue because there has not been sufficient funds. Will that increase cover that need?
Which line item are you at, Ms. McCutcheon? I'm sorry. Are you looking
I
at,
don't have the line item number, but it's the mailage,
oh,
the postage increase.
in the planning department?
I'm not sure where it is in the budget. It's in the description, basically. I'm
Well,
sorry, you're breaking up, Steve.
Which one of the four of me is breaking up? I'm all four of it. I'm breaking up, all four of us. I'm sorry.
The one I can hear.
Yeah, talk to the one that's not breaking up. Anyway, I'm looking at the budget for postage for the planning department, and the budget there is $15,000 estimated 2021. And then the budget for 2022 is $16,500. So is that the question that you're asking? And I'm doing something here because all right, Dawn.
Yeah, I saw there was an increase, and I support the increase. I just want to make sure there's enough of increase so that we can, when we have notices for the public, that we can adhere to our request for 3,000-foot radius for those mailings to apply to.
Well, you know,
so basically I'm asking, is that sufficient an increase in postage for us to?
Well, we did build in an increase. Now, again, you know, a budget is just that. It's a budget. It's our best guess at the time. That's why we have the opportunity at mid-year to adjust our budget if we're falling short, or if we don't think we're going to hit the budget, or you know, our expenditures, then we can adjust it. So I don't like to use the word guess. It's not a guess, but it's an educated guess in terms of where we think the budget or where the postage will fall. But there's not a whole lot of science behind that number.
Again, with the chair's permission,
Sure.
Unless Mr. Newberry corrects me, Ms. McCutcheon, I believe we are meeting the 1,500-foot mailing radius in the more populated areas of Wildwood and the 3,000-foot radius in the less populated areas of Wildwood. And we've not altered that since City Council approved the changes to the distances. The increase reflects what the Postal Service is doing. And as you know, they keep raising rates, and we depend on the Postal Service for those mailings. And I feel confident that we'll be able to continue what we've done in the past and keep people informed. Thank you.
And that reflects a 10% increase, and that's, as Mr. Boone just said,
it was my understanding that even in the denser areas that radius should be 3,000 feet.
I don't recall.
And I know
that.
that's been a problem before because of funding.
I think and again, Mr. Newberry is the one that manages the mailings for us, but I don't remember that coming out of the discussion at City Council, but certainly we'll check. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Deborah. Good questions. Anybody else have anything? Okay, so Steve, are you looking for a motion at this point to present this budget? So we're looking for a motion to present this budget to council at Monday's meeting. Do we have a motion?
Well, actually, Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt, but I'd like a motion that this committee approves the budget as presented, and then it'll be part of the overall budget that's presented to council. But basically, I would be looking for a motion for this committee to approve the parks and the planning department budget as presented.
Okay, thank you, Steve, for that clarification. Motion made by Councilmember Flasher, I guess, and seconded by Councilmember Galani. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, we should be able to do this by a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any
Aye.
abstentions? So thank you very much, Steve. Thank you to your team. Dawn, thank you to you and your team for all the hard work. This budgets are never easy, to put together, and it's difficult decisions have to be made, but this looks very, very well done at this point.
Well, thank you to the committee for allowing us to present it to you all. And I want to thank Mr. Vunich and his team for all the assistance that they gave to Dawn and I in preparing this budget for the Planning and Parks presentation tonight. So thank you to him and his team. So we appreciate it. And thanks for going easy on us and not having too hard of questions tonight. We appreciate it.
Right. Softballs tonight. You get the hard balls on Monday. That takes us to the next item on our action items for planning matters, which is the bid results for Birch Forest turnaround. Joe, this one's you, I guess.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right.
And Mr. Chair, with your permission, Mr. Newberry will share screen real briefly here in a second. Thank you, Mr. Newberry. So, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, this particular project isn't new to any of you. The installation of a T turnaround at the end of Birch Forest Drive has been discussed for at least a couple of years, and in 2021 was finally funded for construction. The steps in the process were lengthy, but ultimately came to a conclusion with the bid opening approximately 10 days ago. The bidding process was very successful in many regards in that we had 8 contractors respond, and all of the contractors' bid prices were relatively close to each other, which is always a good sign that they're bidding apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Also of interest is that the engineer from Cochrane Engineering, Terry Todd, had provided an estimate at the completion of the improvement plans for the project. And as you can see, the estimate was approximately $75,000. And the low bidder, KJ Understall, was at $78,260. So the engineer's initial bid was very close to the amount that the low bidder provided as part of this process. The City Council budgeted as part of the capital improvement program for 2021, $100,000 for this project. So obviously the low bid in this instance is well below what is budgeted. The department does note that as part of that amount, though, the $100,000, we will need to do landscaping in the area, and that will be via a different contractor and another process, so to speak. But for tonight, the department is presenting to you the bids that were received for Birch Forest Drive turnaround. The recommendation from the department is the low bid, KJ Understall, at $78,260, and the department is seeking direction in this regard. I do want to extend my thanks to Rick Brown and Dan Ron of the Department of Public Works. They did a lot of the heavy lifting to get the bidding process complete, and they're letting me tonight kind of present the final results. So I want to thank them both. Mr. Chair, if there are any questions, Mr. Cross, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Newberry, or I are available. Thank you.
Okay, and Joe, you're looking for a motion tonight to approve the recommendation?
Yes, that way, with an approval of the recommendation, the process can then go forward to City Council.
Okay, Deborah, are you making that that motion, or do you have questions, or both?
Make a motion.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the department's recommendation. Do we have a second on that? Seconded by Councilmember Farmer. Is there any questions on the motion? Joe, I do have one for you. KJ Understall, have we done business with them in the past? We're confident with their work?
Dan Ron had mentioned that he knew of the contracting company and that we've done work with Understall, but I don't know if it's KJ Understall. I think it's two brothers. And so Dan was going to talk with them, and by Monday, if any red flags are raised, I'll certainly let you know.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda is the development trends in Wildwood. Forgive me, I don't remember if we had this on our agenda last time. I know this is relatively new. Joe, are you just presenting this to us as an FYI each meeting? And then just if we have any discussions to bring them up at this time?
Mr. Bartoni, that sounds perfect. Again, we talked about this at the September meeting, this being creating something that you all could see what we're doing here at City Hall. And certainly it is just a discussion item. There is no action required. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Joe or the department on this? Teresa, go ahead, please.
I just am curious, Joe, the developers of the Mergen Temple, what is the reason for wanting to change the name of Turkey Track Road?
Well, the reason behind the request, Ms. Clark, has to do with their religious beliefs. They would like to change Turkey Track Road to Peacock Road. Peacock has significance in the Hindu religion. They have discussed this particular matter with Mr. Brown. It came up between a conversation that we were having, Mr. Newberry and I, with the leadership of the temple. Certainly, it's something that we wanted to get in front of all of the committee as well as city council on Monday night, including the mayor. Certainly, it's a decision the city council will make, and there have been no commitments on the part of, I believe, the Department of Public Works or the Department of Planning.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow up on that. Do we have any further drawings or anything that would show the layout of this temple, or maybe a picture that we could get an idea of what it will look like? I did meet the president and vice president at the Mayor Coffee, and they were extremely nice and open to suggestions.
Ms. Clark, as I mentioned, Mr. Newberry and I met with representatives from the temple, and for the most part, we went over some of the most basic items relating to setback distances, some of the concerns about stormwater management, et cetera. So to answer your question, we have nothing yet. We have a schematic that was provided a while back, but it was so, let's say, non-compliant. I was fearful even to release it to the council when I did, because there were so many errors associated with it, so to speak, but nothing yet. And certainly when we do get something, the city council, the mayor, and Mr. Cross will be first in line to receive the information.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, real quickly, Joe, could you describe briefly the process that these folks will have to go through to change that specific road? Do they need to get input from that other community whose name escapes me over there, and the why and so forth, or how does that work?
The city has a set of regulations for street name changes. It's managed by the Department of Public Works. There's a petition that must be completed, and all owners of record along the road must sign it. It doesn't necessarily have to be 100% support. Ultimately, decision lies with City Council. In this particular case, I also think they may need to go to the Historic Preservation Commission. Turkey Track Road is kind of embedded into that area. The subdivisions around there are named Turkey Track, etc. So I think before any decision is made on a name change, the Historic Preservation Commission may want to take a look at it and at least provide a recommendation to assist first the Administration Public Works Committee, and then from there with a recommendation to City Council.
So it would be the, that community that's accessed at least partly off Turkey Track Road, they would count as being quote unquote on Turkey Track. Is that how that works?
Well, the homes in Meadows of Wildwood are addressed
Right.
off
Meadows.
the Meadows of Wildwood Boulevard. I'd have to defer to probably Mr. Brown and the city attorney to answer that question. I wouldn't want to give you a wrong answer.
Okay, well, if council has to talk about it, we need to know before then, but I was just curious. Thank you very much.
Certainly, and we'll be glad to have that information for you.
Any other questions for Joe on the development trends? So Joe, I have one for you, and this is a really nice document that you put together. It's very easy to follow and it's very informative. If it's not too much trouble, at the top where you have like the list of the address, you have the ward number. Down at the bottom where you got the project name, can you add the ward to that as well, please?
Certainly, and I appreciate the comment, Mr. Chair, because it is the first time I've done this, and Mr. Newberry and I kind of labored over it, thinking what's the best approach. So if you all have any other suggestions, please feel free. There's no pride of ownership here. We want to get you the information in the form you like. Thank you.
I agree with Don. I think it was great.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's very easy to follow. Kind of like a one-stop shopping also to know what's going on in the area.
We'll add the ward to the other ones though. Thank you.
Okay. That takes us to park matters, which we had the budget. We've already taken care of that. And then the next two are the next item is the presentation of the capital improvements project. We've already done that as well. Mr. Cross has. And then we get to the update on the in-person virtual recreation. Joe, do you have anything that you want to talk about on this?
Well, Mr. Cruz always does that for us. And so
Okay.
if you have any questions for Mr. Cruz or I, we'd be glad to try to answer.
Any questions? Anybody? All righty. Next item is the facilities reservations. That's always been just an FYI for us also, unless anybody has any questions on that. Okay. That takes us to our executive session. We do need a motion to go into executive session. If somebody wants, made by Councilmember Farmer and seconded by Councilmember Clark. We do have to do a voice or a roll call vote on this, though. So, Mr. Cruz.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
and Chair Bartoni.
Yes. Okay, we'll give Travis a moment to get us back on YouTube.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are live.
Okay, thank you, Travis. That brings us to the end. I just had one question, and if anybody else has anything, we'll open it up. But Joe, so I guess, will our new assistant director be joining us at the next meeting?
Yes, sir. I intend to have Melanie assist Gary and I with this particular committee.
Awesome. Look forward to meeting with her and you to have a full staff. Get back to a normal 60-hour work week.
Well, regardless of the number of hours, I do want to extend my appreciation to the committee. As I mentioned, we've been short-staffed for the better part of 18 months, which also included a lot of COVID-19 kind of things. And the department's been behind and made some mistakes. And so you've all taken it with a certain amount of grace that I wouldn't have expected. So thank you.
I think I speak for everybody that it's shorthanded. You've done an excellent job. That is for sure. Anybody else have any closing comments? I'll take a motion to adjourn. Made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Clark. Non-debatable. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any
Aye.
abstentions? All right, great meeting, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a great week, and we'll see everybody on Monday.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.